Queen Hatshepsut's statues were destroyed in ancient Egypt. New study challenges the revenge theory. After the Egyptian pharaoh Hatshepsut died around 1458 BCE, many statues of her were destroyed. Archaeologists believed that they were targeted in an act of revenge by Thutmose III, her successor. Yet the condition of the statues recovered in the vicinity of her mortuary temple varies, and many survive with their faces virtually intact. Now, a new study by archaeologist Yu Yin Wong re-examines the original excavations and offers an alternative explanation. Much of the damage may in fact be from the ritual deactivation of the statues and their reuse as raw material. We ask him to explain. Who was Queen Hatshepsut and why was she important? Hatshepsut ruled as the pharaoh of Egypt around 3,500 years ago. Her reign was an exceptionally successful one. She was a prolific builder of monuments, and her reign saw great innovations in art and architecture. As a result, some regard her as one of the greatest rulers, male or female, in ancient Egypt. She has also been described as the first great woman in history. Hatshepsut was the wife and half-sister of Pharaoh Thutmose II. Following the premature death of her husband, she acted as regent for her stepson, the young Thutmose III. However, about 7 years later, Hatshepsut ascended the throne and declared herself ruler of Egypt. Why was it believed her statues were destroyed in revenge? After her death, Hatshepsut's names and representations, such as statues, were systematically erased from her monuments. This event, often called the proscription of Hatshepsut, is currently part of my wider research. There is little doubt that this destruction began during the time of Thutmose III, since some of Hatshepsut's erased representations were found concealed by his new constructions. The statues that formed the subject of my recently published study were discovered in the 1920s. By this time, Thutmose III's proscription of Hatshepsut was already well known, so it was immediately and rightly assumed it was caused during his reign. Some of the broken statues were even found underneath a causeway built by Thutmose III, so there is little doubt that their destruction took place during his reign. Because the statues were found in fragments, early archaeologists assumed that they must have been broken up violently, perhaps due to Thutmose III's animosity towards Hatshepsut. For instance, Herbert Winlock, the archaeologist who led the excavations of 1922 to 1928, remarked that Thutmose III must have decreed the destruction of every portrait of Hatshepsut in existence, and that every conceivable indignity had been heaped on the likeness of the fallen queen. The problem with such an interpretation is that some of the Hatshepsut statues have survived in relatively good condition, with their faces virtually intact. Why was there such a great variation in the treatment of the statues? That was essentially the main question of my research. How did you go about finding the answer? It was clear that the damage to Hatshepsut statues was not caused solely by Thutmose III. Many of them were left exposed and not buried, and many were reused as building material. Indeed, not far from where the statues were discovered, the archaeologist found a stone house that was partially built using fragments of her statues. Of course, the question is to what extent these reuse activities added to the damage of the statues. Fortunately, the archaeologists who excavated the statues left behind field notes that are quite detailed. Based on this archival material, it is possible to reconstruct the locations in which many of these statues were found. The results were quite intriguing. Statues that are scattered over large areas or have significant missing parts tend to have sustained significant damage to their faces. In contrast, statues found in relatively complete condition typically have their faces fully intact. In other words, statues that were subjected to heavy reuse activities are far more likely to have sustained facial damage. Therefore, it is likely that Thutmose III was not responsible for the facial damage sustained by the statues. Instead, the destruction that he was responsible for was far more specific, namely the breaking of these statues across their neck, waist, and knees. This form of treatment is not unique to Hatshepsut's statues. Fascinating, so what does this mean? The practice of breaking royal statues across their neck, waist, and the knees is common in ancient Egypt. It's often referred to as the deactivation of statues. For the ancient Egyptians, statues were more than just images. For example, newly made statues underwent a rite known as the opening of the mouth, where they were ritually brought to life. Since statues were regarded as living and powerful objects, their inherent power had to be neutralized before they could be discarded. Indeed, one of the most extraordinary discoveries in Egyptian archaeology is the Karnak Kashet, where hundreds of royal statues were found buried in a single deposit. The vast majority of the statues have been deactivated, even though most of them depict pharaohs who were never subjected to any hostilities after their death. This suggests that the destruction of Hatshepsut's statues was motivated mainly by ritualistic and pragmatic reasons, rather than revenge or animosity. This, of course, changes the way that her relationship with Thutmose III is understood.